Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, November 1st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Penn State game is in 1 day. The game against Michigan in 29 days. All right, we'll take care of some housekeeping up front. Yes, there's a Ross Fulton defense show still in the hopper for this week. We'll get that to you as a bonus episode as soon as it's done. Also, Tony, Kevin, and I headed to State College, Pennsylvania on Friday to cover this weekend's Ohio State-Penn State game. We will have a live team arrival show from the Buckeyes Hotel in State College coming up Friday evening. That is usually around dinner time, let's say 6-ish o'clock. Depends a little bit on their flight plan and all that kind of stuff. But go ahead and clear your calendar for Friday evening. We will be there as the Buckeyes arrive in State College. All right, on with today's show. We've talked a bunch about the new format for the 12-team college football playoff. And I think there's a lot of interest because there's a lot of uncertainty about a lot of things involving that playoff. We've kind of done a bunch of those projection shows where we sort of say, okay, based on where things are right now, here's what the bracket might look like, just so you can sort of wrap your heads around that. The first college football playoff selection ranking show is coming up next Tuesday night. Nothing else going on in America that night, so you can safely clear your calendar that night as well to spend it with Kevin, Tony, and I as we recap what we learned on that first college football playoff committee show of the year. So we also, earlier in the week, got a chance to talk to college football executive director Rich Clark. He had a teleconference along with Brett Hancock of the committee to just kind of talk about, answer some questions, walk people through the process. We've really understood how it all worked before they did their first show next week. So I'm joined by Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. He was on that call with me, got to ask them a question at one point. But I guess, Tony, let's start with some of the more basic stuff. There's been a lot of conversation about, hey, the non-Power 5 champ this year, say Boise State, for example, what if they're not the 23rd best team in the country? What if they're a better team? How does the selection process and the seeding process work for the team that is the non-Power 5 champ?
Yeah, basically, if you're ranking the conference champions at this point, and if they are the third highest ranked conference champ, then they would be the third seed, and rather than then we always just view them as whoever that's going to be is going to be the 12 seed. It's not necessarily that way. If they're the 8 seed, then they would fall in line there. You can't just assume they're going to be 17 or something like that, where then they're just slotted in at 12. I did also find it interesting. One of the questions was, well, what if they're not in the top 25? And then it's just like, well, we'll just rank basically the conference champs, and then the 5th highest ranked conference champ would become that team, and then they would be 12. But they don't necessarily need to be 12. If they keep climbing the rankings, they're just going to fall in line like a Tennessee or a Penn State or an Ohio State or a Georgia would.
And another thing that's interesting that I think people just sort of assumed with they'll be the lowest ranked team. Theoretically, if the Big 12 champion has 2 losses and is the 17th best team in the country, and Boise State has 1 loss and is ranked as the 13th best team in the country, Boise State would be the 4 seed because they would be the 4th highest conference champion. It is not just automatically the Power 4 conferences get those top 4 seeds. It is the 4 highest ranked conference champions who get those top 4 seeds. So theoretically, yes, Boise State could get a bye, or whoever the non-power champion is. Could be Army, could be any of those teams. They could theoretically be a top 4 seed, could be a higher than 12 seed. So, all right. So that's question number 1. Thought that was interesting. Next thing was, it went into how they're deciding what those rankings are, because those rankings are going to go a long way towards determining what that bracket looks like, really are going to determine what that bracket looks like. And the committee is relying a lot on data from a company called Sport Source Analytics, and they're going to be looking at all sorts of power rating stats and all that kind of stuff. And then someone asked, can we see them? And they said no.
Yeah, no, Sport Source Analytics is also what almost the penultimate tiebreaker, the second to last tiebreaker for like the Big Ten, basically. And it's all of these data sets and strength of schedule, and it's all proprietary, basically. So yeah, people were asking, what about the strength of schedule, and how do we know that your strength of schedule is, accurate, or what data are you using? So it's interesting to see people wanting to know exactly how this is all devised. But then, do you remember like the BCS computers? Like there were people who would want to know what numbers are you putting in, so that then they could put those in and project them because they'd have all of the same numbers. Whereas Sports Source Analytics is like, no. These are ours. Just trust us, man.
Who has earned less trust or more trust over the years than the College Football Playoff Selection Committee? It has been always a sort of vaguely transparent process, real vaguely in some cases, and that is going to continue to a certain degree this year. They were asked also about conference runners-up, the fact that this year you've got teams who are playing in the College Football Playoff, or in the conference championship games in the lead-up to the College Football Playoff, and of course, the conference championship game winners get a huge benefit, which is they then get automatically one of the top 4 seeds in the playoff field. The question is more about the other team, the team that loses in that game. Are they punished for losing? Do they get a boost for playing in that game? How is that going to work?
Yeah, one of the quotes was, "They won't be unduly punished." So basically, and then I asked for a clarification in terms of a team making it and being compared to a team from another conference that didn't, because it used to be if you won your conference championship, that was one of the data points. It was conference champions, strength of schedule, head to head, and like strength of record or something that they would look at as data points. Now, since they don't need to use conference champions as a data point in comparing because you're automatically in depending on your level, I wanted to know, is now making the conference championship a data point, and it is not. You're not going to get any boost for it, as Rich Clark told me, but just the fact that you've made it tells everybody that you've had a good season. But I also, it was interesting where he did say, we're a sophisticated bunch. Like, the committee's sophisticated. They recognize who has made it and who hasn't. But, it is going to be interesting to watch this unfold and the outrage of all of this. But I think the key thing that I took out is if you make it, great, don't lose bad. Don't get blown out, because you won't be unduly punished, but you will be punished.
Yeah, if you lose a 2015 Big Ten championship game, the Iowa-Michigan State game, where, oh boy, it's a real close game, goes right down to the final minute, you're not going to get punished for that. If you get 2014 Big Ten championship games, 59-0 by Wisconsin, well, then that probably will be held against you. So that's we'll see how that, how true that ends up being. Something else we'll see how true it ends up being. They were asked about, are you going to be juggling? Can you maybe just kind of put a little finger on the scale there and slide some people a spot up or down to avoid rematches? It seems like from a television product perspective, yeah, you'd probably like that. You'd like to have a Big Ten team playing an SEC team rather than a Big Ten team playing a Big Ten team and an SEC team playing an SEC team. That feels like something that might make their corporate champions happy, Tony. So is the committee going to do it?
Tom, no, of course the committee's not going to do it. I know people think this is just a television product created to air on network television and cable and to put a bunch of eyeballs on the television. That this is devised to find out. Yes, Tom, of course they're going to put the thumb on the scale. They say they're not, but wouldn't we all want them to anyway? Like, and one of the questions was posed like, yeah, but like say you're deciding between two teams that are, 6 and 7, basically, like if you switch the other one for the other, nobody would care because we all agree that these are close. Wouldn't we all want them to avoid rematches as well? And wouldn't they want to avoid rematches? And wouldn't their television partners want them to avoid rematches? So I understand them saying, no, that's not going to be any part of the consideration, but they're going to talk about a lot of things. And if I would be surprised if that, isn't part of their conversation, but then maybe at some point, if they want to get rid of a conference, be like, you know what, Clemson, Florida State, you guys are playing each other or something like that, or maybe, if you've got too many SEC teams in or whatever, then maybe you try to put them together or you don't try to keep them apart. But I think everybody would like to see them just like, we don't care about moving a team one spot. I don't think anybody does. It's the whole manipulation of the rankings that gets people more angry than this one little thing, this one weird little trick to avoid a rematch. I don't think anybody would really have an issue with that.
You wouldn't think so. We'll see when we get to that point of the process. I think lots of people are going to have lots of issues with lots of stuff at that point because that's just kind of how things work at this point. But yeah, right now, just sort of in the cold, sterile environment of not knowing how any of this is really, truly going to work, it does feel like if you could avoid having Ohio State and Oregon play for the third time, or Alabama and Texas, or Georgia and Texas playing for potentially the third time in a quarterfinal or semifinal type matchup, that feels like that would probably be a good thing. So we'll see whether that ends up being exactly how it works. Something else we're going to see how it exactly works is the semifinals and how they're going to try and avoid putting the number one team in a bad spot. The example that I always think of, and I asked about this summer, was, hey, Ohio State's number one, or it could be Oregon, or it could be whoever. Can you avoid putting them in the Cotton Bowl where they might have to play Texas in the semifinal? Can you just flip them to play in the Orange Bowl? Or if Miami's on their side of the bracket, would they be definitely placed in the Cotton Bowl? Because that's a decision that's going to get made before, on Selection Sunday. You're going to know this team, if they win on New Year's Day, they're going to the Cotton Bowl or they're going to the Orange Bowl. That will all be laid out on the bracket. So can they take that into account? And it felt like we got about 4 different possible answers to that question.
It is. And I'm just trying to look through the transcript real quickly to just refresh my mind on all of the answers, because we were initially told, they can do something to make sure that Ohio State isn't playing in the Cotton Bowl against Texas in the semifinals or something like that. But then what we were told in this teleconference was that there is no consideration for that unless there needs to be consideration, and in which case maybe they could do something. They probably wouldn't. So I think we maybe had this in a group text or in conversation. A lot of some of this teleconference felt like they were coming up with some answers on the fly, and I know that's not the case. But when you're posed with all of these different questions, you're searching the rules that you've all laid out. But it didn't seem like there's going to be any type of it's whatever is closest to you. If you're the number one seed, that's where you're going. And they don't want to, there's too many moving parts. They're 2 games away from it being an issue, and you can't really worry about you having to play on the almost home field of the 6th seed or something like that, or whatever, 7 or 8 or whatever. And so you're just going to have to deal with it. And honestly, Tom, Midwest teams have been dealing with that forever in the postseason. So it's just kind of part of the deal of playing college football in the Midwest. But what are these circumstances where they would, take that into consideration? Because it seemed like there were circumstances, but not normally.
Yeah, I wonder if the dividing line, because they did talk about, trying to project things multiple games down the line. I wonder if the dividing line is, well, if, Ohio State or Oregon is the 1 seed and Miami is the 4 seed, and Miami would only need to win 1 game to get to the semifinals, then you would avoid putting them in the Orange Bowl side of the bracket, because then you put them, the number 1 seed would be playing in the opposing team's home stadium in the semifinals, which seems like that would be something you could relatively easily avoid. And the example they gave was they used last year's ranking. So, they had Michigan as number 1, and they said, well, Michigan is slightly closer to Dallas than they are to Miami. Those are the 2 locations, I guess, Arlington and Miami Gardens or whatever, Hollywood, Florida, wherever the Orange Bowl is these days. That Michigan is slightly closer to Texas, so therefore they would send them there. And it's like, that doesn't, saving them 17 miles in the air is how this decision is going to be made. That doesn't feel like that's the intelligent way to do it, but it's at least the way that it's sort of being discussed right now. It's not something that the team is going to be just given a check 1 box, Orange Bowl or Cotton Bowl kind of thing. It's all a little vague. We'll see how it all plays out. as with the avoiding rematches thing, it feels like you might get to a point where common sense wins out, even if it's, well, technically, we've got a little bit of wiggle room. Like the little bit of wiggle room might win out as a common sense thing. Will it? Well, we'll all find out together as they go through the whole college football playoff selection process this year. Again, that starts next Tuesday. Tony, Kevin, and I will be doing our usual college football playoff live watch-along show, looking at it, reacting to it as it happens, and then giving you the answers that we get in terms of the post-show live call-in interview segment thing that we do as well with the CFP folks. So sometimes we get some answers there, sometimes not. Sometimes they make sense, sometimes not. But it's that time of year again. We will be back with that next Tuesday. But before next Tuesday, we have a bunch of coverage this weekend about a game that's going to have a lot of impact on that first college football playoff rankings reveal. Ohio State and Penn State, another top 5 matchup for the Buckeyes in Happy Valley on Saturday. We'll be there Friday night covering the Buckeyes team arrival. We will be there Saturday covering the game. You can find it all at BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.